The boxes were still stacked in the hallway when my phone rang. We'd only gotten the keys 4 days earlier. 4 days, and I hadn't even unpacked my kitchen yet. There were mugs wrapped in newspaper sitting on the counter, a coffee maker still in its box, and I was standing in the middle of what was supposed to be our dining room, holding a tape measure and trying to figure out if our old table would even fit. The afternoon light was coming through the window in that particular way it does in late October in Ontario, low and golden and a little sad, and I remember thinking that this was it. This was the thing I had worked for. For 8 years, I had worked for this. My phone buzzed on the floor beside a box, marked kitchen. Fragile. I didn't recognize the number, and I figured it was probably someone from the moving company following up, or maybe the utility company needing to confirm our transfer. I picked it up anyway. "Is this Elise Harmon?" "Yes," I said. "Miss Harmon, my name is Carolyn Shea. I'm a notary with Shea and Briggs. We're a firm here in Kitchener." A pause. Not a long one, but the kind that has weight to it. "I need you to come in as soon as possible. There's a matter with your property that requires your signature and your attention." Another pause. "I'd ask that you come alone. Please don't mention this call to your husband." I stood there in my half-unpacked dining room, in the house that we had just bought together, and I said absolutely nothing for what felt like a very long time. I should tell you about the house first, because the house is the point of all of this. I grew up in Guelph, the second of 3 kids, in a semi-detached on a street that flooded every spring. My parents rented their whole lives, not because they were irresponsible. My dad worked in logistics. My mom did administrative work at a dental office. But because the timing was always wrong, or the down payment wasn't quite there, or something came up with the car or the roof or one of us kids, owning a home was this abstract thing that existed somewhere in the future, always a few years away, never quite arriving. I left for university in Waterloo at 18, studied accounting, got a job at a mid-size firm in Kitchener right out of school, started at the bottom, and spent the next several years doing exactly what I told myself I was going to do. I saved. Not dramatically, not in a way that made for a good story at dinner parties. I just spent less than I made. I brown-bagged my lunches. I drove my car until it had 200,000 kilometers on it. I didn't take vacations that I couldn't afford. I opened a TFSA the year they launched, and I put money in it every single month without fail. By the time I was 31, I had enough for a down payment. I didn't tell many people. It felt private somehow, like announcing it before it was done would jinx it. I just quietly started going to open houses on weekends, learning what things were actually worth versus what they were listed at, figuring out which neighborhoods were changing and which ones were already done changing. I was methodical about it. I had a spreadsheet. I am an accountant. Of course I had a spreadsheet. I met Garrett at a work event about 3 years before any of this happened. He was there with a client. He was in commercial real estate, mid-level, ambitious, good at the social parts of the job. He was funny. He had this way of listening to you that made you feel like what you were saying was genuinely interesting, which is rarer than it sounds. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours at that thing, and he asked for my number before he left. We dated for a year and a half before he moved into my apartment. Engaged about 8 months after that. We got married in September. Small ceremony, immediate family and close friends, a venue outside of Cambridge that had a barn and a lot of string lights and a catering company that did an excellent butter chicken for the non-red meat people at our table. The house was always part of the plan. We'd been looking together for about a year by then, combining my savings with what he'd been putting aside. I had the larger portion of the down payment, significantly larger if I'm being honest. But we were buying the house together, both names on the title, and it felt like the right thing. The grown-up thing. We were married. That's what you do. We got the keys on a Monday. The call came on a Thursday. I didn't say anything to Garrett that evening. He came home around 6:30 with Thai takeout from the place we liked on King Street. And I set out paper plates. It's because we hadn't found the real ones yet. And we sat on the floor of the living room because we hadn't figured out where the couch was going. And we ate pad CU and talked about what color to paint the main bedroom. He wanted a dark gray. I wanted something warmer, maybe a terracotta or a deep sage. We didn't decide anything. It was a nice night. I lay awake until almost 2 in the morning. What Carolyn Shea had said was so specific. Come alone. Don't mention this call to your husband. Those aren't words you say by accident. Those aren't words that mean nothing. A notary doesn't call you 4 days after you take possession of a home, ask you to come in without your spouse, and mean nothing by it. I kept running through the possibilities. A mistake on the paperwork. Some kind of error with the title that had to be corrected. Something administrative that only affected me because of how the documents were filed. Maybe it was something about my accounts specifically, something that had been flagged that had nothing to do with Garrett at all. Maybe there was some entirely innocent explanation and I was lying here making myself sick over nothing. But you know how it is. When you're an accountant, your brain goes to the numbers first. And the numbers said, we made an offer on this house in August. The offer was accepted. We went through the whole process together. The inspection, the lawyer appointments, the mortgage approval. Every step together. Garrett handled a lot of the communication with our real estate agent because I was deep in Q3 reporting at work. He was the one who dealt with the back and forth. He was the one who had the relationship with the agent. I hadn't actually reviewed every document as closely as I should have. I knew that now. I got up at 3 and went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up every email I could find related to the purchase, everything I'd been copied on, everything that had been forwarded to me. I read it all again. And there, buried in a thread from early September, before the offer was finalized, before we'd agreed on the closing date, was an email I had received and apparently not read closely enough at the time. It was from our real estate agent, and it referenced a document. A side agreement. Something about a buyer's arrangement with respect to financing contribution. I read it 3 times. Then I went back to bed, stared at the ceiling, and waited for morning. Carolyn Shea's office was in a low-rise building near downtown Kitchener, the kind of place with frosted glass doors and a reception area with good lighting and a bowl of wrapped mints on the front desk. I got there at 10:15 for a 10 o'clock appointment because I'd gone around the block twice telling myself to calm down. She was in her late 40s, I'd guess. Dark hair cut short. Reading glasses she took off when I came in and set on top of a folder that was already open on her desk. She stood to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Harmon," she said. "Please, sit down." I sat. I folded my hands on my lap to keep them still. "I'll be direct with you," she said. "I'm required to be, given the nature of this." She opened the folder and turned it to face me across the desk. "This is a document your husband presented to my office approximately 3 weeks ago. It was executed and notarized prior to your closing date." I looked at it. I read it. Then I read it again, more slowly. What it said. In the kind of language that is technically simple but emotionally enormous, was that I was acknowledging the funds I contributed to the home purchase as a personal loan to Garrett Harmon, not as a joint equity contribution, and that in the event of a separation or dissolution of the marriage, those funds would be returned to me as a debt repayment rather than an equity split. It had my signature on it. I looked up at Carolyn Shea. "I didn't sign this," I said. She looked at me steadily. That's why you're here. I need to stop here and tell you what 8 years of savings looked like in concrete terms, because I think it matters. I had put $214,000 into the purchase of that house. Garrett had contributed $68,000. The remaining amount was covered by our joint mortgage, which was in both our names. Under the standard rules of co-ownership in Ontario, which I knew because, again, accountant, the equity in a matrimonial home is split equally between spouses upon separation, regardless of contribution. That's not a loophole, that's the Family Law Act. It exists for a reason. The document in Carolyn Shea's office, if legitimate, would have recharacterized my $214,000, not as equity, but as a loan. It would have meant that on paper, Garrett owned half the house's equity while owing me a debt. The difference, depending on how property values moved, could be significant, could be very significant, and my signature was on it. I'm going to need a moment, I said. Take all the time you need, she said. Can I ask? Why are you telling me this? She paused. Because the document was presented to my office for notarization. And in the course of verifying the parties, certain irregularities came to our attention regarding the execution. I'm not in a position to say more than that right now, but I felt you should be aware. Irregularities, I said. Yes. I looked at the signature again. It was close. It was very close. But it wasn't mine. I've signed my name thousands of times. I know where I put the H. I know how the loop on the L falls. This was a good attempt. But it was an attempt. I asked her if she could give me a copy of the document. She said she would prepare one for me. I asked her not to contact Garrett about our meeting. She said she understood. I walked out to the parking lot, got in my car, and sat there for 19 minutes. Here's something nobody tells you about discovering that your husband may have forged your signature on a legal document. You don't cry right away. There's a phase before the crying where your brain just goes very quiet and very focused, like it's rerouting all available resources to processing what just happened, and everything else shuts down temporarily. I sat in that parking lot, and I didn't cry, and I didn't call anyone, and I didn't do anything except think. I thought about the email thread I'd found the night before. The buyer's arrangement with respect to financing contribution. That document. He'd had that prepared in September before we closed. Before we were married, technically, we got married mid-September. The house closed mid-October. He'd had it drawn up somewhere, signed my name to it, and taken it to a notary for authentication. I thought about how he'd handled all the communication with the agent. How he'd been the one to manage the paperwork flow, how I had trusted him to loop me in on everything important because I was busy and he was in real estate and he understood the process better than I did. I thought about what I actually knew about Garrett's finances, his $68,000. Where had it come from? He made decent money, but he also spent it. Dinners out, golf, a wardrobe he maintained meticulously. I had never asked him directly because it felt intrusive. We'd both put our contributions in and moved forward. I'd never dug into the source. I drove home. He was at work. I went upstairs to his home office. Still mostly boxes. And I started looking. I'm not proud of that, and I'm also not sorry. I was looking for evidence in my own house. I'm allowed to look in my own house. What I found wasn't what I expected, which is a recurring theme in this story. Garrett's $68,000 had come from a line of credit he'd taken out against. I had to read this several times. Property that he'd had an ownership interest in through a business partnership. A property I had never heard of. A partnership with a person whose name I didn't recognize. I found a folder at the bottom of a box labeled MISC. Office that had documentation on the partnership. A commercial space in Waterloo, purchased 6 years ago, 2 partners, Garrett and a woman named Sandra Kelleher. Not a business name, a person's name. I closed the folder. I put it back exactly where I found it. I went downstairs and I made myself a cup of tea, and then I called my cousin Bridget, who is a family lawyer in Hamilton, and I told her I needed to talk to her, and I told her it was urgent. "How urgent?" she said. "Very." She was quiet for a second. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said. "I'm safe. It's not that. It's financial." "Okay," she said. "Can you come this weekend?" I said yes. I didn't say anything to Garrett for 3 weeks. I know people always want to know how you do that, how you sit across from someone at dinner and have normal conversations and sleep in the same bed and not say a word. The truth is, you just do. I don't know that I can explain it better than that. You make a decision that you're not going to tip your hand until you know what you're dealing with, and then you keep the decision. You have conversations about paint colors. You unpack boxes. You go to IKEA on a Saturday morning and you argue mildly about the merits of 2 very similar bookshelves. You do all of it. I was not good at it. I was deeply not good at it. I cried in the shower every morning, and I slept on approximately 2 hours a night, and I lost 4 pounds without trying. I got very good at the kind of conversations you can have on the surface of things, the kind where you're present enough to respond, but not present enough to actually be there. Bridget connected me with a colleague of hers who specialized in property disputes and matrimonial law. I met with her twice over those 3 weeks. The situation, she told me, was complicated but not hopeless. The signature on the notarized document was questionable enough that it could be challenged. Carolyn Shea had flagged the irregularities for exactly this reason, which was a significant point in my favor. The partnership property in Waterloo existed and could be investigated. The question of the fund's origin was relevant to the case. "What do you want to achieve here?" my lawyer asked me. "I want my money protected," I said. "Whatever else happens," she nodded. "That's a clear objective. We can work with that." I also want to tell you about Sandra Kelleher because I think it matters, even though this part is harder to talk about. I found her on LinkedIn. Waterloo, commercial property management, profile photo that showed a woman maybe 5 years older than me with a pleasant, professional smile. I found her connection to the property through regional land registry records, which are public, and which I knew how to access because, again, accountant. What I also found, and this took longer, and I'm not going to detail exactly how I found it because it doesn't matter, was a social media account that she'd had the privacy settings turned down on. Posts from 2 years ago. A weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake. A cottage somewhere north of Huntsville. A post that said, simply, "The best kind of Thursday," with a photo of a restaurant table set for 2 and a glass of wine, with someone else's hand visible at the edge of the frame. A hand wearing a watch I recognized, a watch I had given Garrett as an engagement gift. I put my phone down. I didn't pick it up again for the rest of the night. I asked Garrett to meet me for lunch on a Tuesday. Neutral ground. A restaurant near his office that we both knew, not a place with particular significance, not somewhere emotional. I'd made a reservation for noon. I got there first and ordered a sparkling water and waited. He came in at 5 past, kissed me on the cheek. Sat down, picked up the menu, started talking about a deal he was working on, asked if I wanted to split the flatbread appetizer. "Sure," I said. "That's fine," he ordered. The server left. He asked about my day. "I met with a lawyer," I said. He looked up from his water glass. Something went through his face. I watched it go, and then it was gone, and he was neutral, careful. "Oh yeah? What for?" "A notary called me about 3 weeks ago," I said, "from a firm in Kitchener. She had questions about a document that had been presented to her office. A document with my signature on it that I didn't sign." He was very still. "I've had 3 weeks to look into this," I said. "I've met with a property lawyer twice. I know about the agreement you tried to have notarized. I know about the line of credit. I know about the partnership in Waterloo. I paused. I know about Sandra. I decided before I came that I was going to say his name. Not as an accusation, just a statement of fact. Garrett. I know about Sandra. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, how long have you known? Which told me everything. Long enough, I said. The flatbread arrived. Neither of us touched it. I want to be clear about what that conversation was and wasn't. It wasn't a screaming match. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't deny everything. I didn't threaten anything. We sat there in a reasonably nice restaurant in Kitchener, Ontario, on a Tuesday in November, and we had the kind of conversation that dismantles a marriage, and we both kept our voices down the entire time. He told me the partnership with Sandra had started as exactly what it looked like on paper: a business arrangement, a co-investment in commercial property. He said the other thing had happened gradually, over about a year, and that he hadn't planned it. I didn't respond to that, because what do you say to it? He said he'd thought the financial arrangement, the document, was protecting both of us. He actually said that he'd done it to protect both of us. I told him I was an accountant. I told him I understood exactly what the document did and exactly who it protected, and it was not me. He didn't have much to say to that. He asked what I wanted to do. I told him I'd spoken with a lawyer and I had a clear picture of my legal options. I told him I wanted to come to an arrangement that resolved the property situation fairly before we had any further conversations about anything else. I told him I'd be staying at my friend Pam's for the time being. "You've already planned all of this," he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Elise." "I know," I said, and I believed maybe 40% of that. The property matter took about 4 months to resolve. Bridget's colleague was thorough and methodical and cost me more money than I wanted to spend, but less than I would have lost if I'd done nothing. The notarized document was successfully challenged. Carolyn Shea's flagging of the irregularities turned out to be critical, and I owe her more than she probably knows. The settlement acknowledged my full contribution to the property as equity, not a loan. The house was sold. We had bought it together in late October, separated in November, and the for sale sign went up in February. It sold in April, in a market that wasn't particularly kind, but it sold. My portion of the proceeds came to me in May. I put a significant amount of it into a TFSA, put another portion into a GIC I'm not touching for 2 years. Kept a reserve that I've been cautious and deliberate with. I'm renting now. A 2-bedroom in a building I like, near a park, in a neighborhood I've always found appealing. I have a meal plan on the fridge and a plant on the windowsill that I've managed not to kill. I have very good locks. People ask me sometimes whether I miss the house, whether I'm angry about losing it. I don't miss the house. The house never got to be what it was supposed to be, and you can't really mourn something that never had the chance to become the thing you imagined. What I miss is simpler and harder to name. The version of that afternoon, before my phone rang, when I was standing in the dining room with the tape measure in the October light, thinking this was it. Before I knew that particular, it had already been broken before I got there. But I built that savings account once. I know how to do it. I know the exact steps, in exactly what order, and none of them are mysterious or particularly complicated. They just require patience, and I have always been good at patience. I'm starting again. It'll take less time this time. I know what I'm doing now in ways that go beyond the spreadsheet, and the next time I buy a house, I will read every single document myself, from the first page to the last, before I sign anything.